Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 7th of June 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we will be joined today by live video Skype link by Alex Thomson with Eastern Approaches. And of course, Alex will be reporting from his base deep inside the Netherlands. Well, it's election time. I've chosen a tie. Our view is vote anything but Tory and Theresa May, unless you want the dictatorship that comes with it. But away we go with the news.
Yeah, we're going to start off with the Law Society Gazette, who are running an open discussion. Are human rights in the way? And the first question is, in the way of what? Of course, Theresa May suggesting that they're in the way of dealing with extremism and terrorism. This is what she said: "I'm clear, if human rights laws get in the way of tackling extremism and terrorism, we will change those laws to keep British people safe." Alex, this is exactly the point I've been trying to make for quite some time, that the clamour for human rights law, the clamour for human rights, of course, governments give human rights, governments can take human rights away. We have forgotten our millennia-old tradition of God-given unalienable rights.
Yes, Mike, the mass Tory voter in the country is expected to understand by what Theresa May is saying about those human rights laws, are expected to understand by that she's talking about the dreaded Blairite HRA of 2000. But no, she is, of course, talking about the proper original, the Claim of Right of Scotland and Bill of Rights for England of 1689, with those classic 13 points, which people can read to themselves within a minute, which are the inalienable rights, such as Parliament setting laws and taxes, for example, and no internment, something which a lot of the alternative media is now clamouring for.
And we have to remember, of course, that the Bill of Rights is a restatement of traditions which go back earlier than Alfred the Great.
Yes, I'm looking at the Declaration of Right here, the treaty, and before and after the 13 points, they make this point, the Lords who declared it. The top of the list says the vindication and asserting their ancient, meaning former, rights and liberties. And at the bottom of the list, it talks about the Lords, on behalf of the people, claim, demand and insist upon their undoubted rights and liberties. So the English and Scots people, all the peoples of our islands, used to know that, and that's why they reasserted these in 1689 and indeed in 1215.
And so when we look at the coverage of this, and also just look at the social media rhetoric, I saw one particular poll on Twitter today asking, is Theresa May correct to be considering getting rid of the Human Rights Act and replacing it with some kind of British Bill of Rights? The debate and the argument is kept between whether we have British human rights or European human rights, and no discussion of the broader context.
That is the danger, Mike. And the danger is if you pretend that something which exists in law is only a statute, then you have a danger of supersession, that the existing statute can be replaced or narrowed or broadened or rescinded or repealed by another statute, because a statute is on the same footing as another. That's the narrow framing of this debate. You know, statutes are given, statutes are taken away. Statutes are under the common law and they're under treaties between people and Crown. Magna Carta was a treaty between people and Crown. Parliament didn't exist then. The Declaration of Right existed in a period when Parliament and the Crown had been vacated. You know, so these things are anterior and superior. They cannot be taken away by statute.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that's the serious matter of law, which indeed it is, let's have a look at what a couple of our local MPs or parliamentary candidates have been up to. This is Gary Streeter, the Tory MP, Plymouth Tory MP, that simply wouldn't engage over defence cuts. He got abusive when he was asked to comment on the front page of the Times and the Telegraph, talking about the perilous state of Britain's armed forces. Now we see what he's really concerned about, because he's been whinging over Twitter that some naughty people have been damaging his election posters. So these are some of the pictures that he's taken. If you don't want to know what Gary Streeter is like, well, that is Gary Streeter. I just find this incredible. This man can't talk about defence. He can't talk about the wars that we've helped to create. He can't talk about child abuse. But you damage his little hustings banners and you're in for trouble. I'll just remind people, I saw one of his banners there, and this is cyber warfare, because you can do a lot just with a computer. So there we are. That's how you deal with Gary Streeter. But this is mysterious, because this morning, Mike, you saw on this roundabout campaign team for local Tory Johnny Mercer.
Yeah, I actually saw, this is now, how long has the campaign been running for now? About 6 weeks?
Something like that.
And this is the first hint we've seen of people actually out with any sort of signs trying to talk to the public. It's
trying
quite
to talk
staggering.
to the public. So you alerted me. I drove around the roundabout looking, but unfortunately there was no sign of Johnny Mercer and his team. They had
Must have been a rapid response squad or something.
Well, they were there for 10 minutes or something, and then they mysteriously disappeared. I did have a good look around. I looked in the vegetation, and we could not find any sign of Johnny Mercer and his campaign team. So that's the standard of Johnny Mercer. Ex-forces, refuses to stand up and bring the government to account on their record with what's happened to Britain's armed forces. Not interested in that. But he can, well, he's hiding pretty clearly in the vegetation somewhere. Then we've got Oliver Colville, local Tory MP. His big issue was not the war in Syria, missing children, the lack of jobs, people sleeping on the streets. He was very big on hedgehogs.
That must be what Johnny Mercer's team were up to then.
Well, maybe they were looking for hedgehogs, Mike. I don't know. This is the farce of British politics. Some time ago, we had a joke because we said that the South West Hedgehogs chairman, Spiny Norman, had withdrawn support from both Mr. Cameron for his abuse of pigs and Oliver Colville because he wasn't doing the job for hedgehogs either. This is the state of Britain's politics. Quite unbelievable. And then, of course, we've got The Guardian now saying, well, you must be careful. You've got to vote for pro-European Union candidates. Whatever you do, we must stay in the European Union. And also The Guardian here saying that Britain's election has been transformed. Well, as we look at the pantomime going on around us, that is certainly true.
Well, Alex, we haven't mentioned too much the Liar Liar song, but Theresa May's not very happy about it. Is there any awareness of this type of Mickey taking on the continent, or are people in the continent even paying attention to the British election?
Well, the Spaniards are, because El País has already, at the bottom of one of its articles last week, noted that there is going to be European Union military integration and that the European Council and Commission are considering it, particularly the Commission as we speak. But El País writes, we can't frighten the Brits because they need to have their election first and they will be disgruntled if they find out straight after their election that they're still involved in European military union. So to that extent, the continental high-ups are involved, and El País is one of the few papers that actually gives us a view of the elite view, as it were. Most of the continental press suppresses this, and to the extent the continentals are aware of Britain, they're just asking about why do you have so many terrorist attacks. I've got schools around here, left, right and centre, telling me that they're cancelling their school children's visits to London and Canterbury and so on, because the chance of them getting caught up in an attack or an incident is very high. In fact, some school children already have from the continent, mercifully not killed, but certainly injured. And I think there was a French girl killed in the first of the attacks recently in London. So the Continentals aren't really aware of our general election, and they don't understand it either because they think that we have PR and they don't understand that we vote for individual representatives. That Liar Liar song is available here on Spotify, and I'd recommend people listen to it because that's a legal way of listening to it. And here's one of the lyrics from it. We all know politicians like telling lies, big ones, little ones, porky pies. Saying they're strong and stable won't disguise we're still being taken for a ride. Nurses going hungry, schools in decline. I don't recognise this broken country of mine. I want to have a government that doesn't think that fascism is where it's at. That's at number 4 in the British charts now, though you wouldn't know it from the BBC because it's banned.
Absolutely. But, you know, Theresa May had apparently such a huge lead a few weeks ago, which she apparently has systematically destroyed for herself. People, well, this is somebody tweeting this out, brilliant work from Sky News today, holding Theresa May to account for her cuts in policing. But it's not just policing, it's a whole range of areas.
Yes, but policing is the one that she is very culpable for, because obviously she had a very bad relationship with the police from the time she was Home Secretary, or as the press tells us now, we have to call her Interior Minister because all the foreigners in Britain won't understand what that is. But she was Home Secretary for the longest period in post-war history. And she seems to have told the police, well, I say I can go stronger than seems to, but I have to protect sources. She seems to have told the police from day one, because her husband, of course, had an interest in the thuggish private security firm G4S, which wanted to take over policing work on a contractual basis. She told the police, I am going to destroy you, I'm going to rip apart your culture, I'm going to slash you to the bone, you're going to end up as social workers. And that's what we've got, of course. So we have to fill them in with soldiers for the hard-nosed stuff and G4S for the petty crime, which isn't being investigated. I know that only pro-Labour people are tweeting these clips, like Sky News journalists daring to ask a proper question about her own record. But there's a reason why these are being shared. Okay, the unions are far left, but they do have a point, the police union in particular, when they say, Ben Priestley here, that crime statistics are woefully underrepresented. Property crime is not being investigated now in any force in Britain. And in that clip there, Priestley of the police union was saying armed and violent crime is up something like a quarter, even in just police's own recorded statistics, though they are going out on the beat less and being tied up more by paperwork. So the real shooting up in violent and theft type crimes is probably a half or even 100% increase.
Yeah. Now, this is going back a week or so, but this was the Plymouth Herald because Theresa May had carried out one of her secret trips to the southwest and had managed to be interviewed by a Plymouth Herald reporter. And it is a staggering interview. So this headline here is 3 minutes of nothing. Herald reporter reflects on PM's encounter. Now, I'm not going to read the quotes of the answers, but just to say that he asked some pretty specific questions and she gave non-answers to every single one of them. And so I know that really, for me, epitomized not only how she was managing to hemorrhage support, but also it gave, in my opinion, a clue to her state of mind, because the questions, the answers were irrational in the context of the questions.
Yes, what this reminds me of, Mike, is we've got to the point which happens in the shelf life of the leader of either of the two main parties in Britain. The point where everyone is thinking, oh, especially within their own parties, oh no, that ghastly frontman or woman, we just have to scrape on with them because of the impending election. And if you recall, Ed Miliband, who was in the pocket of the unions and so on, gave that embarrassing interview which was shared widely, where he said, he was asked 8 questions, I think, by the BBC, and he said to each one in reply, we need to get round the negotiating table, because that was the soundbite he'd been given, and his mind had said, you will not vary from that, whatever you are asked, the same syntax must go in every answer. And so with Theresa May, who's, I think, psychologically frail at this point, the signs are clear, she's being wheeled out. And when she's given her 3 minutes with the journo, he asks her about fishing, he asks her about jobs, and she says, I am clear that, I am clear that, I am clear that, I am clear that. And she's not all there.
Alex, this is reframing. This is applied behavioural psychology. Cameron boasted very early on that anybody who was going to hold any position of power in the Tory party was going to be subject to a Briggs-Meyer type psychometric test. And we know that there have been people working inside the Tory party for a long time to reframe individuals. Doesn't matter whether they're Tory party politicians or their civil service. And this, of course, is what you get, sound bites. And if you try and move them off the sound bite, you're introducing cognitive dissonance, the stress, and then we see this bizarre behaviour. And for me, that has got to be Theresa May sort of moving up and down and throwing her head back, laughing in a sort of demonic manner in Westminster. I think this lady is damaged. I think she's been damaged by her own party. And my prediction is if she's elected, she is going to be replaced pretty quickly.
Well, of course, that's the point that Ian Crane's been making on the last 2 episodes of Humanity versus Insanity, the election specials, the third of which is on at 3 o'clock this afternoon. But somebody else has picked up this theme as well. This is Tim Ireland on Twitter. And in any case, she's out of there as soon as the election is over. She'd be lucky to attend the first of the Brexit talks. And the graphic there that he was tweeting out said, your choice at this election isn't this May or that May. Theresa May's leadership is doomed after her worst election campaign in living memory. Even if she wins, she loses, and we can't predict who the next Tory leader will be. We could have a good guess.
Yeah.
Boris, for example, which would
I
be...
think they'd like him in, Mike, but I still think they got a problem getting him through the public.
Yes, absolutely. But so Theresa on her last legs. But the response then to Jeremy Corbyn is getting a bit hysterical in the Mail and in the Sun. Apologists for terror is a headline. Jez's jihadi comrades is the Sun headline. We have the Leave campaign pushing this out, which is a photoshopped image of Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, and John McDonnell alongside Gerry Adams. And who is that? Abba Hamza or somebody on the left-hand side there. Labour and Friends don't wake up to this on Friday morning.
Yeah, this is very crude propaganda, isn't it?
It goes on. The Telegraph exclusive special branch monitored Jeremy Corbyn for 20 years amid fears he was undermining democracy. The Telegraph again, Jeremy Corbyn said ISIL supporters should not be prosecuted for expressing a political point of view. And, well, Alex, I don't know what your thoughts are on that last headline.
Well, there was a context, in the 1980s. There were good old-fashioned socialists that don't understand good in a moral sense. I'm just using it as a set phrase. There were old-fashioned socialists who made no bones about it, and they drew on a tradition of talking about just Ireland and England as entities. And the struggle of the nations, which was actually quite widespread in the centre and right wing of politics in their generation as well. But they were the last ones to cling on to it. So when they were talking about England getting out of Ireland and political prisoners and so on, I'm viscerally against it. I was an Orangeman in the past and very committed to the Union. But you have to accept that the likes of Tony Benn were in the same bracket as Corbyn, honourable men who were peacefully, they met some very bad choices of who they dallied with, but they were wanting to see in their own prism and their own discourse, of colonial liberalisation, they were wanting to see England, as they would call it, modernise and leave Ireland as a fraternal nation. It sounds very, very dated, and with hindsight, we know about the Troubles and so on. But Corbyn, at the time he was meeting and dialoguing with Adams, McGuinness, and who knows, some Americans behind them. So were the Tories in quiet desperation, trying to, in the phrase that the nationalists use in Northern Ireland, they were bringing Sinn Féin IRA in from the cold, but they were doing it even more secretly. And often it was Special Branch and Thames House who were doing that, bringing them in from the cold. So that which Corbyn was being investigated for is something the establishment was itself doing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's come in at a different angle. And many people have been saying, what can they do to change the situation in the country, not just in this election, but also politically. People saying we need to know what to do. We say stand up and be counted. And we just like to put this on screen. This is Danny Bamping, who is standing as an independent candidate locally in Plymouth. So Danny has done exactly the right thing. He's decided that the best effort he can make is to stand up and challenge during the election. Of course, he's been banned from all the local hustings. We don't want any independents being able to tell members of the public what's really going on. So doors slammed in his face. This is in the Sutton and Devonport constituency, the very same constituency that I personally stood in. 2010, thanks Mike, and I experienced the same thing. I was not allowed to join in hustings with the approved candidates, but encourage you to go and have a look at YouTube, where Danny's got some very interesting film clips and audio up, including conversations he had at his home with Oliver Colville, who was coming around canvassing as the Tory MP. And Mr. Colville makes some amazing statements on tape, which Mr. Bamping felt needed to be preserved for the general public. So we'd say in your area, do not vote Tory, but if you think you've got a good independent candidate, or indeed a candidate from other parties that is capable of thinking, vote for them, but do not vote for the Conservatives.
Right. EU military unification is a subject that we have been working on for a long time, along with David Ellis, and Alex has referred to it already this morning. Last November, the European Commission released their Defence Action Plan, which was entitled towards a European defence fund. And it turns out that they have now today announced a new common defence fund to help, they say, to help Europe stand alone as a global military power.
Yeah.
This is somewhat different rhetoric than the British government would like us to hear, but what we're talking about here is Europe standing alone as a global military power. Now, what's interesting is that they say that that is all the while tied to NATO, but nonetheless, what we're talking about is a common defence fund which will deal with, it'll be in two strands. One strand is development of future technology, and the other strand is common procurement. This is exactly what David Ellis has been talking about, and hopefully we'll talk more about it tomorrow. Sadly, The Guardian has had to comment on this. So they say EU to outline plans to use funds for defence for the first time. And there's one interesting paragraph in this. It says, in an implicit challenge to Britain as it heads for the EU exit, they claim, the European Commission will say no single EU country, not even the largest, can afford to develop the most costly military equipment alone. And the quote they have is, the development of a new generation of many major defence systems is today beyond the reach of a single EU member state. And that's according to a draft paper that The Guardian says they've seen. More Europe in defence and security is clearly needed. So, Brian, Alex, this is what we've been warning about.
Well, we've been spot on. David Ellis, absolutely spot on with everything he said, that the Conservative government under Theresa May, but also Cameron, of course, utterly lying. The objective was to produce EU military unification. And to achieve that, Britain's armed forces had to be cut so that they were capable of being assimilated into the EU. And that is still continuing.
And Alex, the timing of this is very interesting, one day before the actual vote. So not really enough time for anybody to gain traction on this issue as an election issue.
I wonder whether there was some leaning on May for this timetable, bearing in mind that the Commission plans such things months ahead in secret, the European Commission. That sounds very nefarious because, of course, the public view is that May is our great champion against the EU and its machinery. But I wonder, obviously, in practice, British general elections are held on a Thursday in May or early June. That's just the time that we have. Okay, we have fixed terms now, but that's traditionally when we had our elections because of the fair weather. And so someone must have thought that's the British window. We'll plan it in around that, I'm afraid. And if you're wondering where the talk first came of single point budgets and using military and defence budgets as an excuse to have a single treasury and to tax jointly, okay, it came from the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, the pinnacle of the financial system. But ultimately, it didn't come from the continent. It came from the British and the Americans. And Duncan Sandys, in his 1957 white paper, spelt Sandys with a Y, was the junior defence minister who said the same on a Britain-wide scale. We can't afford to have many producers. We need one. And that's just a rolling out of that idea. And on the American side, you need to read the 1971 interview with W. Averell Harriman, Harriman, who says we wanted all along the Europeans to be militarily united and the Continentals didn't want it after the war. And I had to bang their heads together and tell them that the Americans and British want this for you. So we are guilty of this, not the Continentals.
Well, let's just move on then. Sorry. I got the wrong one. If we move on to this one, morale among the Royal Marines is at a low because we're not at war, says the Plymouth Herald. That's a pretty spectacular headline.
Yes, this was, of course, the one chance that your local rag had. Well, I shouldn't be too discomplimentary. They seem to have a few real reporters on them, actually. Your local paper, the Plymouth Herald, managed to doorstep the Prime Minister and, in this case, the Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, and said they had a graph as well. At least they published it. I don't know whether they waved it in front of his nose, saying Royal Marine morale is an absolute low. And they're all being concentrated here in Plymouth in the supercentre. What's the reason for this? And he said, tush, it's because they're not at war. I mean, that really is quite something, isn't it? Morale is bad because they're not being shot at enough. But I do notice that the Royal Marines are being clustered in Plymouth, which is this empty, large number 2 Royal Naval base, rather than being at Portsmouth where most of the ships are. And this is rather parallel to what's happening in Holland, where the Royal Marines used to train in an inland location, and they're all being moved to Vlissingen or Flushing, where I reported from once in a cafe, some viewers will remember, with all that shipping going on behind me. And again, that's a large, commercially valuable but underutilized and militarily vulnerable area where, who knows, commercial corporate interests may want private armies to defend the shipping lanes. That seems to be what's going on with the Royal Marines in both countries now.
Alex, very, very dangerous times as far as the military is concerned. We're going to continue to talk about the military over the coming days and weeks. Royal Marines morale is at rock bottom, of course, because of the cuts and because, of course, the government has used them for some of the most dangerous fighting possible there in Afghanistan and other locations. And then what happens? We've had Sergeant Alexander Blackman put in prison. He was clearly a political prisoner for the Tory parties, cynically released just before the elections. We know all that's going on. We've got reports of young Marines, of course, suffering from their injuries, not treated properly. We've got veterans sleeping on the streets. This is nothing to do with not enough wars. It's the fact that the government is neglecting the very armed forces that it wants to go and fight these overseas wars. And it's an outrage, of course, that in Plymouth we've got a close down of the Royal Marine Barracks. So all of the historic background for the Royal Marines is deliberately being shut down. Not a murmur from any of the local Conservative MPs. I've already mentioned Gary Street or Oliver Colville. Even Johnny Mercer, Army officer, or he calls himself former Army officer, has never stood up to be counted. But that brings us to the Navy, Mike, I think.
Absolutely. So according to UK Defence Journal, the flight deck of the new HMS Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier is 70 metres wide and 280 metres long, enough space for 3 football pitches. And that's just as well, Brian, because the staff on this, the sailors on this ship, of course, will have nothing to do other than play football for the next several years until they get their first aircraft.
Until they get the first aircraft. And we've got the pitiful situation, Mike, that we've had to send teams to work on board the French aircraft carriers in order to keep up skills. We're short of manpower. We haven't got enough flight deck crews. We haven't got the F-35B aircraft. We've got Royal Naval vessels which will have no surface-to-surface missiles. We've got no maritime patrol aircraft. We've got no air-to-surface missiles for the helicopters. Britain's armed forces being decimated, and this is to make it easier to increase the power of the EU military. But we've talked about language. Let's have a look at this one. So this is the Mail crowing about the fact that Queen Elizabeth is now being manned, no aircraft. Isn't any mention of that bit in this particular article. But my eye was caught by this. Captain Simon Pettit on the HMS Queen Elizabeth said the vessel was, that's their language, is part of a 6.2 billion project to allow the UK to help other nations, quote, police the world. So we've got one aircraft carrier with no aircraft, but that is going to be used not to defend UK, but to help other nations police the whole world.
But that's okay. It must be fake news because there's a typo there.
Well, yeah, it could be. And then the ship pictured has previously been described as the most potent conventional weapon against Islamic State. Now, Captain Simon Pettit isn't going to take this vessel to sea. He's the captain who's been in charge of the build. But what sort of language is this? Alex, we are now starting to see rubbish come out of the mouths of people, be it politicians or senior military people. This is the result of conditioning, surely.
Yes, Brian, I'm not quite sure, for starters, how an aircraft carrier shorn and bereft of aircraft can be a conventional weapon or any weapon at all, but it can be a psychological nerve centre, can't it? And as you've reported before, people don't understand this about the Navy. It's there to win hearts and minds by putting into port, but that can be turned to the bad as well. Now, what's happening is, you know that Chinese proverb, full teapots make no noise and half-empty teapots rattle a lot? That's happening now with the trickle down the naval officers. The intelligent ones at the top, although they're quite arrogant kind of intelligent men, have been giving hints, if you look at the first Sea Lord speeches and the like, that we're there to help lesser countries to reframe their militaries and to keep up the globalist agenda and frighten anyone who declares sovereignty against it. That's now trickling down to, dare I say it, the Tim Nice but dim middle-ranking officers. And this one here, Captain Pettit, is saying, giving away more of the plan than he's supposed to. Yes, we're here to reframe other countries that really do have navies.
Okay, well, let's move on then to the London Bridge attack. Now, this is a video on LiveLeak. London terrorist attacks honest reaction from local man. And what's being claimed here is that this is a local Iraqi man in London, so an Iraqi national who's living in London, sharing his reaction to the London Bridge attacks on Periscope, which is Twitter's live video platform. And it then says GPS shows he was streaming close to the area in Kensington, London. Alex, tell us.
This has been tweeted all over the shop as nasty Iraqi saying in English, F you and F your flag. And this is a real local Muslims' reaction and joyful welcoming of the attacks. This has gone all over the place on Twitter. I thought this didn't sound right. And a viewer of ours who doesn't have Arabic, but who does have a sharp eye, said, this doesn't look right, Alex, because he's looking at a phone screen and reading stuff off that. So I ran it by an Iraqi academic source, and he came back with this. These are not Iraqis. They are from one of the Gulf countries. They use 3 characteristic words of Gulf dialects not found in Arabic: ata, shadar, ani, and kafu are the 3 words, which identify them as not Iraqi. By the way, they're too dark-skinned to be anything but Marsh Arabs, and they're Shia, so that wouldn't apply. So they're definitely Gulf men, probably Qatar or Bahrain or somewhere. And what they're saying is, the chap that you see here with the mugshot in views in the yellow T-shirt is saying, wow, we've got 270 views on our YouTube. Look at this response. And then his mate in the blue T-shirt says, what's happened? I swear I'm not going to read out those comments in English. And then he does. And the comments in English are telling the Arabs to F them and their flags. And let's just block this guy. He's insulting Arabs. And then the one on screen again in the yellow T-shirt says, wow, we've even reached America with our views. Woo! That's a world different, isn't it, from what's being reported?
So this is what? What do we say that this is then?
Fake news and deliberate incitement of the people of Britain in a raw mood after several attacks against local Arabs. I mean, these guys are just, slick bobber boys, probably just having a quick cruise in from Qatar or somewhere. They wouldn't even know that there'd been an attack going on. They've just made some stupid video about we are Arabs, we are Gulf state or whatever, and they've got Americans saying F you and your Arab flag, and that's, of course, is a brilliant way of turning that around and saying, look at these nasty Muslims who are cursing us and our flag after an attack.
Yeah. And Alex, I'm just going to interject here because we're getting reports which are coming in via the chat room of an incident taking place in Bridge North in Shropshire. Now, we haven't got any details, but we've got somebody saying that a street has been closed. There's cars everywhere. There seems to be some sort of incident going on. And the individual who made the report said they were actually concerned for their child who was reporting some of this, it would appear, from school or outside school. So we don't know what's happening, but it appears that something is going on at the moment in Bridge North.
Okay, Alex, let's move on to Qatar then. And this is a Dutch tweet from De Volkskrant. Tell us about it.
It's the Dutch equivalent of The Guardian, and this isn't about Qatar, it's about the Ariana Grande concert. She had a benefit concert, and you can see her on, I don't even know who the chap is that she's bumping and grinding with, but this annoyed even the Guardian reader class that read the Volkskrant. Here they are tweeting out, probably some 21-year-old just joined the pop music desk, saying, it took a horrible terrorist attack, but pop history was written in Manchester on Sunday night. How's that for a sense of priorities?
Yeah. Okay.
That I just have to sit here quietly because it is outrageous, isn't it? How the pop world has now been is pushed in our faces as if it's some form of reality.
Yes. Right. So is this good news? This is the Royal Mint. The Royal Mint bullion has achieved Sharia standard on gold compliance. This must be good news, Alex.
Well, Mike, if I knew what Sharia standard on gold compliance was, I would be able to welcome it or reject it. But I have a fairly good layman's understanding of Islamic jurisprudence and Hadith and Sharia, and I've never heard of Sharia compliance on gold. I mean, gold doesn't contain any haram elements, and a lot of Muslims from various parts of the globe love to be festooned in it. Sharia gold is a concept I'm fairly confident in saying. I've read some experts on it, like Patrick Soukhdeo, one of the writers on Islamic finance. I'm fairly confident in saying that the Muslim world didn't have such a concept as Sharia-compliant gold. I think it's been, like a lot of other Islamic finance products, invented in Britain and exported to Dubai. But the key questions here are who applied for the Royal Mint's bullion to have Sharia compliance, and who was brought in to vet it? And what does it imply about who owns the gold in Britain?
Good questions. So here is the Qatar slide. I do apologize getting these in the wrong order in my mind. Qatar rift sets back Trump's Arab NATO is the headline on this.
Yes, and here we have some fairly good quotations. At the end of the article, we have it being downplayed by Rex Tillerson, the US Secretary of State, and the Defense Secretary James Mad Dog Mattis, saying the Arabs are just having a tiff, nothing to be concerned about. But the two experts quoted earlier in the article have some interesting points to make. The most compelling is a former, well, he's been in all the agencies, Bruce Riedel. He's been at the CIA, Pentagon, and the NSC in Washington. And he says the concept of an Arab NATO is now falling apart, and that this is about regime change in Qatar, because the Saudi people who, as you quoted yesterday, the Saudi royal family, are basically just Wahhabism in clothes, in royal garb. They're trying to delegitimize now the Qatari sheikhdom, which of course is one that Britain largely set up, like the Bahraini and the Omani. And then we have Ilan Goldenberg of the Middle East Security Program at the Center for a New American Security, a man whose title screams neocon, as does his name. And he says it's a lot more complicated than we're just going to unify the entire Sunni world against Iran. And then he signally says it's not NATO, as in the real NATO in Europe, where you can bring all these countries together like in Europe with something that has quite frankly evolved over a long period. In other words, the Anglo-Americans haven't had long enough to scheme in the Gulf. What seems to be at the relative root of it is Qatar has been tempted to behave like a cartel. It's actually broken away with the other Takfiri and Wahhabi groups. Qatar's own favoured group, of course, is the Muslim Brotherhood, which was favoured in the Obama administration and by Mrs. Clinton. But now, because they have huge gas reserves, they're more interested in playing gas cartel games with the Iranians and Russians, who are, shall we say, on the less terrorist side of the equation in the Middle East. And that is what really raised the hackles of the Saudis and the others there, the Bahrainis and so on, is that the Qataris might see gold, and financial gain taking the upper hand against loyalty to Sunni extremism. So there's going to be a real tiff over this, I think. But Qatar is basically dependent on air supplies. The Saudis have closed the border, and they've had a run on goods in the supermarkets as a result of this. This is not going to end well. And when Arab states have diplomatic tiffs, it's not just each other's diplomats they expel each other's citizens. And like the Gulf, thanks to a viewer who's pointed me to this, the UAE, the case of the UAE, they actually say if you express sympathy for Qatar, we'll intern you for 15 years. So this is going to cause a large disruption of money and of people in the Middle East.
Okay, Alex, it's always fascinating how our news comes together, both subject and order, but we've just gone through gold there and we're talking oil, Middle East, so we better bring in war. And the Times here reporting SAS helps launch dawn assault and final battle to capture Raqqa. Encourage people to have a look at this article. There's quite a lot of detail in it, but we're now starting to really understand that, of course, everything that the Conservative government has said about Syria has been a complete lie, because here are the troops, the British troops on the ground. We can label them SAS, but of course this is just the label, because Britain does not have large numbers of special forces, and we see them operating everywhere. So I believe that we've now got regular troops in alongside them. Have a look at the map. But this is the key bit here. If you follow these reports through, we're being told some very interesting stuff. We've got Syrian militia backed by American and British special forces last night entered Raqqa. SAS soldiers who've been working with the Syrian Democratic Forces in northern Syria are understood to be on the ground in a supporting role. So Britain clearly has invaded Syria. There's no question this has happened. RAF Typhoon and Tornado jets and Reaper drones are also in close support. But the most frightening thing here is that final paragraph, which says that basically forces of the Assad regime are closing in, triggering a confrontation with Western troops. The Pentagon said that US-led coalition had struck regime forces. So we've got a really remarkable series of events going on here. British forces on the ground. We were told, of course, that Britain would not put forces on the ground in Syria. This is David Cameron lying to the nation back in 2015. We've got Michael Fallon lying to the British nation about troops back in 2015. We pointed out, of course, the fact that the British Prime Minister said at the time, David Cameron said at the time, that his loyalty to Israel was unbreakable, not his loyalty to his own country, but Cameron's loyalty to Israel was unbreakable. And we asked which side was he on, British or Israel. We don't know. Theresa May, well, she pussyfooted around over what was going to happen in Syria. She's now Prime Minister, so I think it's appropriate that we put up the one of the opening shots from that wonderful video. She's a liar, liar, liar.
But it's not just her, because we can't let the Ministry of Defence media team away with this, because when I spoke to them a week or two ago, they absolutely categorically denied any British involvement inside the borders of Syria.
Indeed.
So they are also liars.
We have a government machinery now. It doesn't matter what political party is in Westminster. We've got propaganda and absolute lies coming straight out of the heart of our own government. And of course, that being the case, this nation, if this continues for very long, cannot stand because we are now in a lawless British state where we have military people saying we're going to use our armed forces to impose that same law on countries worldwide. This is very, very dangerous. And I'll just add that we do think there's some incident unfolding in Bridge North. I think that basically there's now armed police on the streets.
Alex, what's going on in Sweden?
This is Fria Tider, which is means leisure. It's kind of a lifestyle website, and it reports here on the plight of some of the hundreds of thousands of teenage girls who are imported to Sweden and whom the Swedish state then pays single old men handsomely to take home and look after, and then the inevitable scandal of these girls being bedded and forced to have sex. But I'm only kidding you, because the genders are in fact the other way round, and it's hundreds of thousands of teenage boys from the Middle East and Africa who are being taken on by old women in Sweden, and therefore apparently we should go back to sleep again and there's nothing to worry about.
Okay.
Okay. Was Mr. Macron's name? No, sorry, I'm confused now. That was...
Yeah, that's the wrong country, Brian.
It's not only the wrong country, but it's difficult to know who's doing what to whom and why at the moment.
Absolutely. And this one?
And this is a letter to the editor of Aftonbladet, which is the Swedish and in fact the Scandinavian largest title. And it was published by them as a piece for debate, and they distanced themselves as an editorial board from what was being said. But we have several people here who are Scandinavians and Nordic nation members of high standing, one from Sweden, one from Denmark, one from Norway, one from Finland, and one from Iceland, which isn't, of course, even in the EU or Norway. But they're all saying now that Britain is leaving the EU, and of course Britain joined the EEC together with Denmark and Ireland, and Norway was the original plan. Therefore, we should all leave together with them. So that would be Sweden and Denmark should leave, and Norway and Iceland should stay out, and Finland, of course, should leave as well. And the reason they're giving for that is that the EU is not the guarantor of peace. It is the EU is already singing its swan song. It's no longer the guardian of peace. It's evolved into a source of conflict. So much political power has gathered in Brussels that it's doubtful whether the member states are even independent. So this is actually now being said on the continent.
Okay, well, we'll move on to this one because this is related to children, and this is a program being called MediaWise. It's from an organization, it seems, called Safe Food, and I'm not quite sure what the link is, and I don't know anything about Safe Food yet, and perhaps people might want to look into them. There's very little information on the website about who's behind this program. This is in Ireland, and the question is, kids see hundreds of media messages every day. They believe what they see. Help them make sense of it all with Safe Food's MediaWise. And it looks like a free resource is what they're describing it as, which is designed to help primary school children learn about the media, learn about advertising, and the key is to identify fake news. And this was launched today. And so, you know, what can we say? Because we've got to provide these kind of resources for our children.
Applied behavioural psychology in order to reframe children so they only recognise government news as being real news. This is what this is. This is to further stop them thinking.
Is there anything like this operating on the continent, Alex?
No, not that I'm aware of. But I should also clarify, I think there's been some confusion over my last point, that when I was talking about those Swedish teenage and young men being imported, I was, of course, referring to unaccompanied minors, as we would call them in Britain. So this is the result of what the Liberal Democrats policy, for example, would bring about in large numbers in Britain, which we already have, which is, of course, people coming apparently as refugees from the Middle East and as unaccompanied minors going to older people's houses. That's the point I was making in the previous one.
And so that's the same type of unaccompanied minors that Tim Farron refuses to protect when they come to this country?
Yes, absolutely right. He's got a lot to answer for.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I better just add that it appears the latest from Bridge North is that some form of assault has taken place. We haven't got any further information on that, but we thought it was worth mentioning as it was coming in live. Encourage you to go and have a look and see what has been happening at Bridge North in Shropshire. We thought we'd end on a happy note, or at least a little bit of black humour. Here we go, because a while ago, the Mail reported quite rightly that Capita was using very aggressive bullying techniques in order to extract the BBC licence fee out of people. Some really despicable tactics. The Mail made their information available to the BBC. The BBC set up an inquiry. And, well, I'm very happy to say that Capita has investigated themselves.
Oh, right? Have they? Oh, good.
They have. And what do you think the outcome was?
I'm sure everything's fine.
Everything is fine. Lord Tony Hall, BBC Director General, has written back to Capita saying he was grateful for their assurances that the behaviours featured in the Daily Mail are neither systemic nor representative of the broader Capita operation. So I think this is really encouraging. We've seen the la-la land of British elections. Now we have had a company investigate itself, and nothing to see really.
Now, remind me why people pay for the TV license.
I'm afraid
you can't.
I can't. No.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for joining us. There we are. This is the state of Britain today. This cannot continue. It's up to us, the wider British public, to put a stop to this nonsense. It seems to us that immediately after the election, we have to be thinking in terms of how we bring each and every individual MP to account. It doesn't matter what party they belong to. Are they applying common sense, morality? Are they honest in their dealings with the British public? If they're not, then of course there needs to be some way to remove them within our system of common law. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.